because the daily diet of corn makes animals so sick. The only thing that will keep them alive until their slaughter date is the daily supplement of antibiotics. There are more antibiotics now being fed to animals in the state of North Carolina than there are being given to the entire human population in the United States. Scientists now anticipate this widespread antibiotic use will result in antibiotic-resistant viruses and bacteria, which needless to say is not a good thing. The development of a superbug is actually no longer a question of if, but when. In fact, recently, there has been an emergence of a pathogen in Delphi containing a supergene that makes the bug impervious to all antibiotics, and it probably won't be long before more emerge. But now we are not only committing animal and antibiotic abuse, we are also committing a terrible crime of environmental abuse. In addition to the nitrogen fertilizer, runoff from farms contaminating our waters, causing abnormal sex characteristics in frogs, and ultimately flowing into the Gulf of Mexico, into a dead zone that is 8,000 square miles large, that is completely devoid of oxygen. There are 61 million tons of waste running off yearly from factory farm manure lagoons. This manure is so incredibly high in nitrogen that even if it can be diluted and sprayed on crops, the runoff from the sprayed manure still ends up contributing to more than 35,000 miles of rivers that have been polluted as a direct result of manure runoff. Since 1995, 1 billion fish have been killed from manure runoff in coastal areas in North Carolina and the Maryland and Virginia tributaries leading to the Chesapeake Bay. The same pollution causes respiratory problems, skin infections, nausea, and depression for people who live near and on factory farms. Now, back to corn, because it doesn't just stop at animal abuse, pollution, and superbugs. Corn has allowed for the production of cheap food, think processed food and fast food. But it is incredibly important to note that government subsidies are not the cause of cheap food, unlike many seem to believe, including some of the leading figures of the sustainable food movement. However, it is still important to note that these subsidies are going to farmers who need the money to survive because they're cultivating crops like corn and soybeans that cost more to produce than they sell for. The real reason why fast food is so cheap is simply because it creates an illusion of being cheap. However, when we look beyond this illusion, kind of like looking through the matrix, we see there are actually monumental costs to the environment, animal welfare, farmers, and our personal health when we buy this so-called cheap food. Cheap food in the U.S. is simply unhealthy, is incredibly over-consumed. Because of this, 2/3 of Americans are now overweight or obese. And yet, 25 to 50% of all food produced in the United States goes uneaten. A lot of you may be aware of the French paradox. Well, I present to you the American paradox. We overproduce, overconsume, and waste enormous amounts of food and energy, and yet there's an enormous population of 28 million food insecure hungry Americans. I'm going to take a moment to discuss the plight of this neglected population. This is the population of single mothers supporting 3 kids and working 2 jobs. The elderly who spend their pension on medication and expensive insurance who are left with barely enough money for feeding, let alone a decent meal. This is the population of immigrants who are trying to make a living in a country whose food supply turns out not to be nearly as stable as our rate of spending on military costs, which is $12 billion a month, which would be more than enough to provide universal free lunch to all children for a year. This is the population of people who relies on food stamps to survive. Food stamps that often run out by the 3rd week of the month, leaving families hungry for a week or more until the food stamps are renewed. This is the population that resides in the city, where all supermarkets, the most available carriers of fresh produce, have left to reap the profits in the suburbs, where income is far greater. Ironically, low-income earning inner-city residents have to pay more and travel further for groceries than do their higher-income earning suburban counterparts. This leaves a food gap, which is quickly filled by fast food chains that would gladly take advantage of a population of low-income earning consumers. Inevitably, the majority of this population is overweight or obese. And there's a stigma against those who are heavier set. But what about these people who are abandoned by supermarkets carrying fresh produce, who work too many jobs to exercise, who are ignored by their country, and who are left with fast food chains as their only option? Do they deserve the stigma? In my opinion, the only thing they deserve is good quality, fresh food. And it is important to note that farmers markets do take food stamps. However, they are not widespread enough to provide to most inner city residents. I'll address this again later towards the end, but the way we can ensure that the local food sector of the food industry will grow is by supporting it now. Despite this large population cannot avoid consuming fast food and being consumed by fast food chains, there's another large, if not larger, population that can make better choices. And yet we continue to eat poorly as a nation. A second American paradox. We are a nation obsessed with eating healthy. Just take a look at the newspapers and any online publication, you'll see how many nutrition research studies are published, and look at how many nutritionists we have. And yet 30 years of nutritional advice has left us fatter, etc. The 3 leading causes of death in the U.S. are heart disease, cancer, and stroke. Diabetes is also on the rise, now appearing more often in children, and it's projected that by 2050, 1 in 3 people will suffer from diabetes if we continue along this dangerous path. And unfortunately, and I quote from a New York Times article, there is more money in amputating the limbs of diabetics than there is in consulting them about diet and exercise. Which brings me to the much disputed topic of healthcare. I take a very simple stance on healthcare, and the stance centers on prevention. We spend $147 billion a year treating obesity-related conditions. However, what if we spend a few more dollars a week on vegetables, took a little more time to exercise, and invest in our health now rather than later when it may be too late? In fact, it's time to stop asking what if, and it's time to start asking why not. The average American spends 10% of his or her income on food. This is less than any other developed nation, and although this should seem like a good thing, we still face hunger in America, and what we're eating is making us terribly sick. You are what you eat, and if what you eat isn't healthy, you will be unhealthy. It's as simple as that. The small amount of money we spend on our food, therefore, implies that we could be spending more time and money on food, but we're not. So where are we spending this time and money, if not on food? The newest Apple technology, a designer bag, maybe a BMW, or maybe we're investing more time and money into finding a plumber than we are into finding healthful, environmentally, and socially responsible food. We are living in a society today where the origin of our cars, batteries, and technology, and the brand of our clothing, bags, and shoes are valued far more than the origin of our food, of what we put into our mouths at least 3 times a day. I mean, wouldn't you like to know where your food is actually coming from? I would, and as a consumer, I demand to know. This finally brings me to what we, as the consumers, can actually do to avert this crisis. Because if we continue along this dangerous path we are traveling now, the results cannot possibly be good. As a busy individual, a high school student taking 4 AP classes, participating in after-school activities, doing my fair share of community service, blogging daily, and still managing to sleep at least 7 hours a night, I still manage to occasionally cook dinner on weeknights, not to mention work on this project for 7 months. And I've also managed to play a role I like to call food dictator in my family. Over the past 7 months, I've tried and failed to get local farms to provide to our school. I've read 7 books about food. I've done endless research on all topics relating to food. I've worked with our school's food service director, Mrs. Nichols, which has taught me how difficult it can be to get local, seasonal, organic as an option for students, a lesson I hope I can learn from in college. I've started Teens Turning Green chapter that's focused on making environmentally responsible choices, and I have managed to pull this presentation together. I truly believe that no matter what age or what income or what job you work, you deserve, and it is possible to eat healthily, seasonally, locally, and organically. I printed out booklets, which are over there on that table, which some of you already have, containing local restaurants, stores, farms, and farmers markets that can help you make responsible choices. And making these responsible choices will only get easier as the local organic sector of the food industry continues to grow.